Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our discussion on safety by design, where we're discussing generative AI principles designed to protect children. This is our big collaboration that we recently announced, just went out in today's newsletter. We also posted it on social last week. Big project with Thorn and All Tech is Human. And that's why we have our special guest today, Dr. Rebecca Portnoy, who we'll bring on in a little bit. I'm going to be your host today. I'm David Polgar, the founder and president of the nonprofit All Tech is Human, where together we tackle the world's thorniest tech and society issues, like how do we deal with the problems of generative AI and specifically how they can harm children. We have a host of issues that we deal with across responsible AI, trust and safety, tech and democracy, public interest technology, youth, tech, and well-being. I also brought on my colleague, Sandra Khalil. Sandra, how's everything going?
Hey, David, everything's so good. I'm so excited for today's talk with Dr. Portnoy.
It will be an excellent talk. It also brought you on not just because you're an incredible host, and we do a lot of great work together, have a lot of fun
For sure.
sometimes, especially in our upcoming in-person event that will be on stage in New York on May 14th, where Dr. Rebecca Portnoy is also going to be one of our special guests, really trying to hit home on this key issue of improving generative AI, specifically the pressure point of tech companies in their role with the development and dissemination of harmful material that, as we've seen with middle schools and high schools across the country with notification apps and things like that, can cause a lot of harm. But Sandra, I think you're also going to be hosting an upcoming live stream for All Tech is Human next Tuesday. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right. I'm really looking forward to my discussion on malicious actors and AI with Imran Ahmed of Center for Countering Digital Hate. We've got Maggie Muntz from TruePic that talks about content provenance and authenticity. And last but certainly not least, Danny Siegel, who is an up and coming malicious actor analyst whose work has been featured in the New York Times. Really should be a great discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
It should be. You see that we do all the lighthearted stuff here at All Tech is Human, but the
Like work.
the important the important thing really is our mission is all about tackling these thorny tech and society issues, and our strength is trying to bring together people across civil society, government, industry, academia. So if you're watching, no matter if you're a student, if you're an artist, designer, academic, if you're just getting in a space, you just read a book or you saw a movie and you're inspired to join this growing responsible tech movement, we want you involved, right? We have a host of ways that we can involve you across our activities that stem from education, community building, and career. So we've got our big responsible tech job board, our Slack community of 8,000 members across 90 countries, regular in-person gatherings. Last year we held 23, and also our weekly live stream, large mentorship program that over 1,000 people have taken. And yes, this is just off my head. No cue cards needed, but we're trying to do a lot because, frankly, Sandra, there is a lot to do. So before we let you go, could you tell us a little bit about your role at All Tech is Human, and also just like your own kind of call to action of how people can get involved? Because I know you also run our affiliates program, where we just recently brought on 43 affiliates across the globe who are all, across our key areas, focused on tackling these hard tech and society issues.
Yeah, thank you, David. I run our partnerships. I've been with All Tech is Human almost 2 years now. I also help our TNS portfolio. So, we've got some great programming under Matt Sowith, our Director of Trust and Safety and Global Affairs. Stay tuned for great work coming out on that side, especially with our safety by design work related to the Oak Foundation. We've got good things in the works there. My call to action is really just to say, if you don't think tech has space for you, it absolutely does. If you come from a humanities background like myself, there's absolutely need for us and an effort to be made with our skill sets, and you'd be surprised, really. So if you're a student, especially if you're exploring the space, we really want to illuminate those pathways for you to think about what you can do post-graduation, especially in this climate. So feel free to visit our website, ping me, ping my colleagues. we curate a lot of great resources for you that David mentioned. So yeah.
Well said, Sandra. I think this is a collective action needed. We need to bring everyone together and leverage this kind of collective intelligence. That's how we're going to change this type of system by working together. And that brings up all of the values, tensions, trade-offs, and best practices, because tech affects us all on a very deep level. So it shouldn't be determined by a small sliver of society. If you're impacted by tech, you should have a voice in it. So please join All Tech is Human. And Sandra, we're going to say goodbye, but not for too long, for you right now in the live stream, and then bring up Dr. Rebecca Portnoff.
Cheers.
All right, we've got Dr. Rebecca Portnoff, the head of data science at Thorn. So welcome to our live stream, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, David. It's really great to be here.
Really excited about today's conversation, because I know you and I have had the opportunity over the last about 11 or so months to work together for this major project that just got released, that you took the lead on and did an incredible job, specifically around these generative AI principles to reduce harms against children, very specifically around the AI-generated CSAM and other harms against children. Could you tell us a little bit more about this project?
Happy to do that, David. And I think I'll start by going back to fall of 2022, which is when Thorn started to first track and measure the prevalence of AI-generated child sexual abuse material, images in particular, in communities that were dedicated to the abuse of children. And what we continuously observed was that this material, the prevalence was small, but that it was growing and that it was consistently growing. And so our posture from tracking this was, this is a growing problem. We have an opportunity to intervene before it becomes something that's really has significant impact globally. And just to give a little bit more context, the backdrop that we're working against in the child safety space, specifically for organizations like Thorn that are combating child sexual abuse, is that in general, the prevalence of child sexual abuse material has really just ballooned over the last decade and more. That last year in 2023, NCMEC, the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, received over, I think it was over 100 million files of suspected CSAM reported to them. So it's really against this backdrop of already just so much of this kind of abuse material circulating, that you then have the factor of generative AI get introduced, where we are again seeing that this technology is being misused today to further sexual harms against children. So that was a problem that we were facing, and it became clear to me during early 2023 that we needed to move quickly before the window of opportunity closed here. And that's when I first had the idea of bringing together child safety experts, AI ethicists, AI practitioners, folks that were building this technology, that were deploying this technology, and then also child safety advocates that really understand deeply how this kind of issue manifests, to bring all of these groups together under the umbrella of responsible technology, building responsible tech. What does that look like in this space to be able to develop, deploy, and maintain generative AI in such a way that these models are less capable of producing this abuse material, that the abuse material that does get produced is able to be detected more reliably, and then that the models and services that create this kind of material, that the spread of those models and services is reduced. And so I reached out to you, David, if you remember. I sent you an email.
I do remember, yes.
Yeah, and I was thrilled. I think it was within 5 seconds that you answered back. And said,
well, yeah. I noticed we both send a lot of emails, and we're both highly responsive. So that's where I think we're great, collaborators together.
Absolutely, it was a good vibe. And so I reached out to you and to get the ball rolling, because certainly I know that a lot of these core tenets of responsible tech and being able to act in an important moment, that these are absolutely things that our two organizations share as far as perspective and desire for impact. And things really continued from there with sourcing, with reaching out to different companies in order to engage with the folks that we believed both had the opportunity to act into this moment and also had the responsibility to act into this moment in order to be able to fundamentally define some of these some of these necessary principles and mitigations to have impact. And so once we had our core working group in place, it was several months of collaborating together, of multiple weekly meetings, lots of hours of brainstorming, of discussing the space, of making sure we had a shared understanding of the issue as well, what kind of opportunities exist across the entire life cycle of machine learning AI, from develop, deploy, and maintain, to have impact here, which ultimately resulted in the white paper that Thorn and All Tech is Human published that outlines these principles, the mitigations that are recommended to help enact these principles, and then further provides resources that we hope will be helpful to enacting some of these mitigations.
And I will say, Rebecca, we just shared that white paper with everyone right in the live stream. We'll also just put it out in a newsletter, and then I know you can find it if you go to Thorn's site as well, and then it'll be in our follow-up newsletter as well. A lot of parts that you mentioned, I think we could dig into. Specifically, you talked about kind of this need for more proactive, nature. You talked specifically around this as being a rising harm over the last 10 years. But I think for a lot of people in this space, we looked at all the current dilemmas around social media, and a major takeaway for a lot of people like myself is, wait a minute, the speed of innovation is rapidly increasing, but our ability to consider these social impacts seems to be painfully slow. So it seems like something really kind of outlined in this project, and then specifically with the white paper, is saying, we know this is a coming increasing problem. It's only going to accelerate. So how do we become more proactive in nature? So Rebecca, I'd love to hear a little bit more about getting ahead, if you will, on some of these issues, and then how you see that playing out with this specific initiative, right? So what does success look like for you on this?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And I think I'll start by saying that that reality that we can be reactive in this space, but that we don't need to be, to me, that's reflected in some of the core messaging of safety by design itself as a framework. And so I certainly want to elevate the leading voices of the e-safety team that established that paradigm of safety by design to begin with, that the idea is to encourage thoughtful development rather than retrofitting safeguards after an event has occurred. And to me, that framework is so powerful to understand that it's not impossible. We don't need to always be taken by surprise, that with the right collaborators, with the right voices working together, with the right prioritization of these early interventions, we really can prevent harm. And as someone who has been, I've been working in the intersection of machine learning AI and child safety for over the last decade, to me, it's just really powerful to recognize that we don't need to constantly be in a reactive detection space. We can prevent harms from occurring. In order to do that, we need to take those harms really seriously. We need to be prioritizing our response to them early. We need to be working together closely across the ecosystem with the right voices to be able to enact those things. And then we need to make commitments and keep them. Like when we talk about success and what the goals of this project were, from the very beginning in our conversations with with All Tech is Human and with these companies, it was clear that the final output of this was for companies to commit to enacting these principles. That it's a great thing to define best practices. It's not sufficient. Defining best practices is not sufficient. We need to actually take action on them. And so to me, I see this release as a really important and necessary first step towards what is a long-term goal of not just these companies that have committed, but all companies to enact these principles, to action on these mitigations. Because one other thing that I've certainly learned from working in the child safety space for as long as I have is that to have impact, we need a holistic response. That if there are pockets of the ecosystem that are not rising to the challenge, you are not going to see the impact that these children and these victims deserve.
Well, that's certainly something we always think about at All Tech is Human when you talk about a holistic response. So you have obviously the very important role that industry plays, which is specifically what this paper is going for with these generative AI principles and the white paper, but then also kind of the youth empowerment side, the educator side, the parenting side, the legislation side. So it's really all parts of these puzzle. And then also the overall responsible tech ecosystem. How do we leverage that collective intelligence? So we're not just working on the same projects. How do we benefit from working together on this? Rebecca, you mentioned kind of all companies, right? We had a bunch of major large tech companies who signed on right now for these commitments. But you're mentioning in the future, we want more and more companies. So how can other companies and also anybody else who's watching, how can they get involved with this initiative? So if you're part of a company that is focused on generative AI, what are your next steps if you're kind of saying, wait, I want to do something a little bit more proactive here?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So if you go to Thorne's blog that we released on this initiative, it includes a link to a resource to be able to connect with, I say someone on the team, but I mean me. You can talk to me about this project, about what it looks like to join into these commitments. Right now, what that looks like is making sure that there's a shared understanding of what you are committing to, and including in that a commitment to transparently share progress with the public on how you are taking action on these principles. Because again, while committing to an action is a necessary and good first step, it is certainly not the end of the story.
Rebecca, earlier you mentioned that you've been involved at this kind of intersection, right, of child safety and generative AI and tech at large for about a decade, right? So always curious, because a lot of what we see at Alltech as humans is we deal with like a real broad range of individuals across, like I mentioned, civil society, government, industry, academia. One of the things that I always like to kind of point out to people, which I think needs more attention, is that oftentimes these stakeholders, if you will, they disagree on the surface, right? So somebody from industry might disagree with somebody in society or the research board or an advocate or a student or academic. But then you start realizing that they're coming together for these gatherings because they're saying, wait a minute, technology is affecting how we see the world. It's affecting our happiness, the human condition, the future of democracy. These are big, big deals, full stop. So you start realizing that even though they disagree maybe about specific issues, which frankly is good in a thriving democracy, we want disagreement. We should disagree. These are important issues. But you start noticing that there's a larger kind of reason why these people are dedicating their life. And you can really cause change from the inside, from the outside, from reimagining a tech future, right? We're motivated with some kind of reason. So what's your own kind of motivation? Because this is a hard field. And frankly, I will say one of the reasons, in my own personal opinion, of why I think it doesn't always get the attention that it deserves is because it's not always polite, to talk about, in the sense that it's easier for me to talk about disinformation than if we're talking about harms against children and some of these really severe issues. It sometimes makes people uncomfortable. So I would be curious about your own kind of motivation. This isn't easy work, right? There's easier ways to make a living than doing what you're doing, and then a lot of the people in this responsible tech field. So what kind of brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my story, and I appreciate you asking that question, David. So I got to go all the way back to my senior year at Princeton. I majored in computer science while I was an undergraduate there. My last year at college, I was asking the same kind of questions that really anybody who's 21 and trying to figure out what to do next with their life is going to be asking. And my choices as a computer science major seemed to be between joining a tech company, getting a software engineering job or machine learning AI job there, or going to graduate school, pursuing more studies. And independent of this decision, my sister happened to recommend to me a book called Half the Sky. It's written by Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times journalist, and his wife. And this book covers many human rights abuses against women and girls across the world. And there is one section that is specifically dedicated to sexual abuse. And so this was my first introduction to the reality of sexual abuse of children. And it really hit me hard, and I couldn't shake it from my mind. So I spent some time thinking about it and praying about it, and I decided that I wanted to work in this space. But I really had no concept of how a computer scientist, how someone with a background in machine learning AI could have impact in this space. I figured that it would be easier for me to find out if I went to grad school. So I said yes to UC Berkeley. I started my PhD there in computer science. And I spent the first year or two of the program cold calling nonprofits and law enforcement and really anybody who would talk to me and asking them, like, how is it that you do your work? Where is it that technology could be helpful? Where is it that technology is causing you problems? What could be done from that, computer science MLAI lens? And I really learned so much about the incredible, passionate work that is done by folks on the front lines. The difficulty of that work, like you are not wrong, David. This is challenging work to engage in. It's you're looking into the face of evil and the face of pain, and that can be really hard to tolerate. But it is necessary in order to be able to do what's right on behalf of these kids who deserve that from us.
Yeah.
And so I eventually I was able to get more and more connected into this ecosystem. My dissertation at Cal focused on what my team at Thorn does today, building machine learning AI to combat child sexual abuse, and that brings me to my current role here.
Well, thank you for sharing that very meaningful story, and then your just overall motivation. And that's certainly something I always find, right, is oftentimes, especially in this field of like trust and safety, and then specifically what you're dealing with in child abuse, right? You wonder, right, why do we face the bad? But people tend to face the bad because they care about the good. Like that's the motivation of trying to kind of co-create, as we're always talking about, co-create this better tech future, realizing that tech intersects with all of our existence, the human experience, right? All tech is human. That's where the name comes from. It's all about what we do today. So that's why we focus on the careers part of it, because if we want a better tech future, we need better people involved in the space, people like yourself, Rebecca. So this is where it's quite important. So as we start thinking more about this project, and then hopefully getting other Rebecca Portnoffs to join, which actually, as you mentioned, Princeton University just became our first All Tech is Human university, part of our university network. So we just launched that last week. Sandra, who started us off, was there, was speaking at it also with Stephen Keltz, Professor Stephen Keltz from our team. So I love how this all comes full circle. But if we think about this and the types of people kind of getting involved, obviously we want more people, we want more companies. So let's imagine next year we do another live stream together. What would you want us to be talking about? Like, what would you want to have achieved? What differences would you have wanted to make? What does 1 year from now look like for you?
I love that question. So I think one specific tangible outcome that we are working towards in the next year is to turn this initial project into an official IEEE standard. For those of you who aren't familiar with that acronym, it's the a very large Internet and Engineering Computing Society that establishes standards that are then adopted by developers and engineers all across the world. And so we have had our working group approved. We are on our way towards turning this into an IEEE standard. And to me, that's sort of one example of the larger goal that I would love to see us move towards, where we have these standards that exist, and then you have in response the kind of natural market forces of third-party auditing systems that can come in, evaluate whether or not you are meeting those standards, and then provide certification guaranteeing that you've done this. And the computer security field, I think, does an excellent job of this whole system from start to finish. And I am really wanting and working towards seeing us have a similar robustness from the child safety perspective when it comes to safe development of technology. So that's one thing I'd love to chat with you about next year on the live stream, is that IEEE work. I think the other line of work that we are pursuing is around the role of regulation in this space. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that these voluntary commitments are a great first step, but they can't be the end of the story. That unfortunately there will be some organizations that do not choose to abide by voluntary commitments. And in that case, having regulators who understand the impact of the issue, the possibilities from a technology perspective, that making sure that these regulators are informed in how they are providing those rules for folks who are not otherwise going to voluntarily join into commitments. That's something that we're also keen to make sure that we are supporting.
I love that. I mean, that's if you know anything about improv, the famous principle there is yes and. And I bring that up because a lot of times people say David, who's responsible for this? Is this an industry problem? Or wait a minute, maybe this is about youth. Wait, what about parents? What about civil society? How do we come up with better research in this field? Well, yes, and it's all kind of a Rubik's cube of interconnected parts, and maybe these pressure points of trying to kind of build this better tech future together. Lastly, as we start kind of winding down our conversation, what has the reaction been from your end so far since the release of this project around generative AI principles and then the corresponding white paper?
I appreciate you asking. I have been generally encouraged by the response. I think that what I'm seeing is that folks wanted a resource like this and are finding value in a resource like this with the papers specifically. I think that really speaks to the kind of hunger that exists in the tech community to be meeting this moment. And so I'm really encouraged to see that folks are finding value in or I'm hearing that they're finding value in the paper already. Mm-hmm. I think one other thing that I'm encouraged by is that I've already heard from a couple of companies that are interested in joining into the commitment. And so I should have added that to my list of goals and things that I want to talk to you about next year, David, is yes, I would love to see more and more companies sign on to this, more and more companies choose to commit to meet this moment in a responsible and ethical way, because it's so rare, David, that we get a chance to set the course of a technology in a way that prioritizes child safety, that prioritizes these kids. And so I'm really hopeful, based on the outreaches that I've already gotten, that we are heading in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why I brought up in the introduction that, one of the media stories as of late, or one of the common media stories, is some of the issues plaguing high schools and middle schools with the notification apps and things of that nature. So it seems like sometimes from a media perspective, we can say, well, wait a minute, is there anything we can do? Or is this future just naturally like headed towards some dystopian type of future? And something we always try to bring up, and again, going back to why we're even named All Tech is Human, is to say, well, it's actually our determination. It's us as individuals who are creating this technology. It's us as individuals who come together to create legislation. It's us as individuals who choose whether we create greater education and whether we empower youth and all age groups in this. So as we start wrapping up, Rebecca, what are some of your kind of final thoughts on this project and what you would like to kind of see happen over the next few weeks, and how people can kind of stay engaged with this?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. I think some final thoughts, I would say, I am seeing this definitely as a first step, that more engagement looks like more folks reading the paper, more folks incorporating some of these guidelines and principles and mitigations into their work. It certainly looks like accountability as well. That's when it comes to making promises, you want to keep those promises. You want to keep them in a way that has tangible impact. So that to me is a big part of what comes next. And I think just to lean into what you're saying here, David, around how these problems can feel complex, they can feel really like just too challenging. I think from my perspective, as someone who's been at that intersection of technology and child safety for a while, there are so many tangible things that can be done, practical things to unpack these complexities and give us what we need to take action. And so that to me is really what I'm looking to continue doing, is helping to unpack these complexities and turn it into bite-sized, actionable items that people can take to make progress.
We definitely need action. So if we want somebody who's listening to this, or maybe watches kind of the video after the live stream, how can they take action specifically with your work and with Thorn? So how can they get in contact with you and Thorn? We already mentioned that we both email a lot. So curious, what's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you and your larger team at Thorn?
Yeah, I would say first step would be to go to the blog that Thorn published on this initiative. And from there, you should be able to access both the white paper and also the contact form to get to learn more about the commitments. I think that I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to say hi to a person who wants to reach out and chat about things. I say this often, and it doesn't stop being true. It's always a pleasure for me to meet people who want to learn more about this space and understand how they can have impact here. I think that we are a nonprofit, and so we rely on donors to help continue to do the work that we do. And so if you want to engage with Thorn in that capacity, the website makes that possible as well. Yeah, I guess all roads lead to the website, David.
I think all roads do lead there, and I'm glad you said, about connecting with people on LinkedIn, because that's a final thought I'll say on my end is that sometimes when you're dealing with these heavy topics, it's very easy to get down. But then what really can be uplifting, at least on my standpoint, is recognizing that yes, it's you and me talking together in this live stream today, but we get to interact with thousands of people who are changing their life, getting into these new careers around responsible tech to say, I do want to build this better tech future. I do care about child safety or other issues that people focus on in responsible tech. So I'm going to actually do something about it. So it's kind of the idea that maybe you're in a small town where there's not somebody else talking about these issues, but there's a larger community. That's why we do our Slack and our live streams and our gatherings. There's a way to kind of find the others that deeply care about these issues and want to actually come together and tackle these thorny tech and society issues. So, Dr. Rebecca Portnow, thank you so much for coming on All Tech is Human's live stream. I'm David Polgar with All Tech is Human. Hope you can stay in touch at alltechishuman.org. So, Rebecca, thank you again for joining our live stream.
My pleasure. Always great to chat with you, David.